to her life. I'll give up.
sun rises high in the sky. There's joy in the heavens, and we affirm our oneness in Devi. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nayaswami and
I'm Nayaswami Padma, and together we're the spiritual directors of Ananda here in Washington.
You all have programs with the words to some of the music. We're going to play two more selections from the nearly 400 compositions by our founder, Swami Kriyananda. And those two selections are There's Joy in the Heavens and Brothers.
And we're very pleased to have our choir director is David he resides at Ananda in Portland, and we have singers here collected from Ananda worldwide.
Let's begin.
Many countries and mixed with many men. I've shared the days of sunshine, gone with them in the rain. The fires at evening said we were brothers. The fires at evening said we were brothers. A soldier I saw weeping beside a dying friend. My officers had said I must hate him till the end. But seeing his grief I knew we were brothers. But seeing his grief I knew we were brothers.
A man sat on a doorstep to see the children play. The gentle way he smiled there would charm your fears away. A stranger he, but love made us brothers. A stranger he, but love made us brothers.
One day I climbed a mountain with friends of other lands.
The words we used were different, but joy one understands. Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. Though words and customs vary like waves upon the sea, one life beneath the surface finds everyone to me. Who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. Who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. Then brothers, why endeavor to set ourselves apart? The fences we've been building squeeze tight upon our hearts. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers.
Our next selection is a choreographed and narrated presentation on Hatha Yoga. We call it East Meets West. Murali Venkatrao, the director of yoga teacher training at the Institute of Living Yoga here in Bothell, teamed up with with drama teacher and the director of the Living Wisdom School for Children in Linwood to present together this view of Hatha Yoga from the standpoint of Ananda Yoga. All of our team members are yoga teachers, certified yoga teachers. Please welcome them.
meets West, meets East, a journey of yoga through the ages. At a distant past, lost in the mists of time, amidst the snowy peaks of the mighty Himalayas, an unknown spiritual master had a revelation. He realized that it was possible to awaken divine perception through graceful physical movement. With a perfect balance of strength and relaxation, powered by a harmonious breath and anchored by a focused mind, these poses expressed silent inner power and divine joy. Known as asanas in Sanskrit, they became a core component of an ancient practice known as Hatha Yoga. In this pose, we see that the entire body is extending, lengthening from feet to fingertips. Muscles big and small work in perfect harmony. The breath becomes deep and full. This generates a subtle inner heat known as tapasya in Sanskrit. This heat purifies the body of disease and rids the mind of restlessness. Practicing yogis seemed almost ageless. They appeared to have perfect health and limitless endurance. More importantly, asanas prepared the body and mind for the rigors of deep meditation. During the Dark Ages, known as Kali Yuga in Sanskrit, yoga retreated into itself. It became more secretive and was taught only to a select few in remote forest ashrams and secluded mountaintops. The spark of divine intuition that lay at the heart of yoga was all but forgotten, and it was practiced only to gain dark occult powers. At the dawn of the New Age, a new set of masters reincarnated on this earth, and they rejuvenated the practice of yoga and brought it back to its original spiritual purpose. Also, at the dawn of the New Age, yoga began to travel west. This exotic practice from the dusty plains of India was received enthusiastically by the industrialized nations of Europe and America. To the grace and inwardness of the East was added the power and precision of the West. With its innate curiosity and a relentless pursuit of perfection, the West examined these poses from every angle, broke them down and put them back together in new ways. The practice of yoga became more precise, more physical. There were many more poses. There were many ways of doing the same pose. Going far beyond exercise, yoga became a healing practice. We use yoga now to feel more awake in the mornings and to sleep better at nights. We use yoga to help us run faster and to recover from having run too fast. Doctors prescribe yoga to treat diabetes and depression, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. The East had only one yoga, Hatha Yoga. The West gave us many. We have hot yoga, power yoga, Ashtanga yoga, yin yoga, vinyasa, Iyengar, Anusara, and Vini yoga. We also have Ananda yoga. And so it was that when East met West, the practice of yoga was enhanced, expanded, and enriched. But something was also lost. After all, has the West not given us beer yoga and goat yoga? You see, when practiced for and only with the physical body, using human power is both limiting and limited. Was yoga not meant to awaken divine perception? In order to do that, we have to connect with the spiritual source deep within. And when practiced with this connection, Hatha Yoga begins to reveal its true power. Every asana becomes a spiritual aspiration expressed through the physical body. The yogi is able to declare, I attune my will to the source of all power. And so, like the prodigal son, yoga returned to the east to find its true purpose. It begins with relaxation. Tension and effort hold us back, but relaxation takes us deeper. I relax and cast aside all mental burdens, and in doing so, I'm able to participate in life more fully with neither doubt nor conflict. Yogis call this quality as santosha, contentment. When my every action comes from a core of deep relaxation, I become calmly active. My mind goes inward and becomes actively calm. Calmness radiates from every fiber of my being, and my body is infused with new strength, new vitality. At the heart of this calmness, I begin to discover the source of great power, infinite, born of silence, conscious and loving. The silent power of the infinite expands within me, and I awaken to new freedom. Instead of struggling with life, I say yes to life. My heart rises in divine aspiration, and with calm faith, I open to thy light. I awaken to a greater reality, and without hesitation, I surrender to it. Yogis call this quality as bhakti, devotion. My heart filled with devotion, I am now ready to take the final step along the path, to change my perspective. When I learn to stand on my head instead of my 2 feet, my mind retreats from outer involvement and seeks fulfillment inside. Instead of being drawn into creation, I contemplate that which created me. God's peace now floods my being. With a single-minded determination and infinite concentration, with body, mind, and soul, I seek only thee. My thoughts and energies rise up to touch the skies. Peace fills me like a fragrance. Silence spreads everywhere. And at last, at long last, I hear thy footsteps in the temple of my heart. How shall I describe the touch of God?
Tranquil, unbroken thrill, eternally living, ever new peace. Enjoyable beyond imagination of expectancy, samadhi bliss. Not an unconscious state, or mental chloroform without willful return. Samadhi but extends my conscious realm, beyond limits of the mortal frame, to farthest boundary of eternity, where I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me.
Feel the divine presence, even if for one moment, when my heart is touched by the hand of God. What else do I want to do other than be grateful for this moment and for the next breath that I take? I express my gratitude through Surya Namaskar, salutations to the inner light. It is set to the Song of Enlightenment, an ancient incantation known as the Gayatri Mantra.
Thank you so much, all of the yogis and the musicians. Thank you. So in the next part of the program, we'll be hearing from our speakers, but before we begin, I want to start by thanking all these speakers for generously offering your time with all of us today. I think we've all become dear friends now in the last couple of years, trying to do this work together of showing the underlying similarities between all truth traditions. And we are honored to have you and very grateful for all of you who are here today. And before we get, thank you. Before we begin, I just want to ask Zach and Haley to make just some brief announcements so we don't do it in the later part of the program.
So we'd like to let you all know that tomorrow at 10 a.m. at our temple in Bothell, Jyotish and Devi will be giving Sunday service, and you're all invited and welcome to join.
And you'll find these on the back of your program. There's also a farm fest tomorrow, a farm lunch, and a satsang with Jyotish and Devi that is sold out, so I'm uninviting you to that one. But I do want you to know about it.
And Monday night at East-West Bookshop, Phil Goldberg will be giving a program on his new book, the Yogananda biography. And that starts at 7 p.m. at the bookshop, and you can find the details for that also on the back of your program.
We'll hear from our speakers here now in just a moment. People have been asking over the months as enthusiasm is built towards this evening, what the heaven's name do you mean by East meets West fast? And so I thought I might behoove me to say something about that. I think in a crowd such as this, we know that throughout the world barriers and boundaries and borders and prejudices of race and nation and religion, etc., are all falling. And at the same time, we also see that there are those institutions, individuals, who are mightily resisting the silent tsunami of expanding consciousness that is sweeping the globe, epitomized by practices like mindfulness, meditation, and yoga. Paramahansa Yogananda, who is the inspiration for the worldwide work of Ananda, when he came to America, seeing a bit into the future, he said, a time will come when the countries of America and India would lead humanity towards a more expanded awareness of who we truly are. And so, this evening is dedicated to seeing, affirming our commitment to the consciousness we possess in meditation, mindfulness, and the practices that bring us together. And when we say East meets West, he said that the material efficiency of the West in science and technology would combine with the spiritual efficiency, the science of mind and consciousness, wisdom and devotion of the East, so that our science would be guided by wisdom, and the wisdom, the timeless wisdom of the East, would be made practical. So let's begin.
So beginning with our guest speakers tonight is the one who just got moved out of the way. Imam Jamal Rahman. He's a popular speaker on Islam, Sufi spirituality, and interfaith relations. Along with his interfaith amigos, he has been featured in the New York Times, CBS News, BBC, and various NPR programs. Jamal is co-founder of the Muslim Sufi minister at Interfaith Community Sanctuary and adjunct faculty at Seattle University. He's a former co-host of Interfaith Talk Radio and travels nationally and internationally, presenting at retreats and workshops. Jamal is the author and co-author of 7 books. Jamal's passion lies in interfaith community building. He remains rooted in his Islamic tradition and cultivates a spaciousness by being open to the beauty and wisdom of other faiths. By authentically and appreciating the understanding of other paths, Jamal feels he becomes a better Muslim. This spaciousness is not about conversion, but it's about completion. Since 9/11, Jamal has been collaborating with Rabbi Ted Falcon and Pastor Don McKenzie, affectionately known as the Interfaith Amigos. They tour the country sharing the message of spiritual inclusivity. Imam Jamal, join us.
Mr. Falcon, thank you so much for the beautiful introduction. I am from the East, and when I see no clock around, I get very concerned because people from the East, they talk and talk and talk and talk till somebody starts to snore. But Rabbi Ted Falcon, my brother here, he has given me his programmed iPhone. But because he's timeless, I think his 5 minutes might be longer, so I might speak longer. Maybe not. So what a joy and pleasure it is to be here. আমি আপনাদের মধ্যে আনন্দিত কারণ আপনাদের মন এবং হৃদয় খুবই খোলা এবং সুন্দর. I just tried to impress you by speaking in Bengali because I am a Bengali. And I said, I'm delighted to be here, especially in this gathering of open minds and open hearts that are so beautiful. So I have immense love and pleasure to say that I hold
Paramahansa Yogananda is such great esteem, not just because he's a Bengali, but because he truly embodies what is in every single mystical tradition. That to find contentment in life, we simply have to evolve into the fullness of our being and be of service to creation. As Rumi says, be a lamb, a lifeboat, or a ladder. He does it so uniquely to evolve fully physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. In the Islamic tradition, there is a lot of emphasis on opening up the mind, going beyond the limitations of the ego. A story which splashes in my heart, which I repeat again and again, is a story of frogs. An ocean frog visits his cousin, the well frog, who has lived in the well all his life. And the well frog says, are you trying to tell me the ocean is half the size of this well? No, more. You don't mean to say 3/4. More. You don't mean to say the entire length of the well. More. Finally, the ocean frog takes the well frog to see the ocean, and the brain of the well frog explodes. In other words, do this conditioning, but do it little by little. And how do you do this? Really, as all the traditions in Islam we say, shine the light of compassionate awareness on yourself. Prophet Muhammad said, know thyself, and you shall know thy sustainer. He also said, die before you die. Die to all that is false within you before you die, a physical death. A lot of emphasis in Islam on opening up the heart, mentioned 132 times in the Quran. It is really about cultivating a sense of inner spaciousness. So much more space for love to flow in, passion to flow in, joy to flow in. But how do you do that? A critical way in Islamic spirituality is, can I embrace not only my 10,000 joys of life, but also my 10,000 sorrows of life? All feelings are sacred. Don't run towards pain and suffering. Just don't run away from them. Rumi says, take a pickaxe. Take a pickaxe and break open your stony heart. The heart's matrix is glutted with rubies. Springs of laughter are buried in your chest. Have you not noticed, says Rumi, that fruits never grow on the trunk of trees? They grow on the branches because they need to quiver and tremble in the breeze so they can receive the blush of the beloved. Once again, don't run towards pain and suffering, just don't run away from it. How else can you open the heart? Something I mentioned in the workshop, the Sufis say, polish your heart, polish your heart, polish your heart, so it becomes like a mirror reflecting the face of Allah. And of course, Rumi says, O Jamal, if you get irritated by every rub, how will the mirror of your heart ever be polished? It requires persistent work. Very quickly, I want to say, in Islam, obligatory prayers we have, 5 prayers, filled with praise and thanksgiving. We bow and prostrate to God. My favorite phrase is, one prostration of prayer to God liberates you, frees you from 1,000 prostrations to your ego. And then silence. Silence. The mystics say, silence. In Islam they say, silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of the little self, the ego. Rumi says, silence is the language of God. Everything else is a poor translation. Lastly, I want to say, these times polarization. To unite minds and hearts, we really have to, as the Quran says, come to know the other on a human level. Can we share 3 cups of tea? Listen, respect, connect. This is the best way to overcome dehumanization of the other. But the Quran says, tongue-in-cheek, we have created some of you to be a trial for others. And Rumi says, oh God, you have created this I, you, we, they, to play the game of adoration with yourself. We should play this game more often. Thank you.
Always with a twinkle in his eye and his heart. Next is Rabbi Ted Falcon. He is a Reform rabbi with a doctorate in clinical psychology who has pioneered the revival of authentic Jewish spiritual tradition. Rabbi Ted founded universally focused synagogue communities in Los Angeles and in Seattle, and now presents and writes as the rabbi of the interfaith amigos. He's a spiritual therapist in a private practice and a popular speaker and teacher of universal spirituality, honoring the interconnectedness of all life. Rabbi?
So, father was left alone to take care of his young daughter, and the daughter kind of was demanding his attention, and he wanted to read the paper. And he saw in the paper there was a picture of the world, and with a stroke of brilliance, he cut out the picture of the world and made it into a jigsaw puzzle, and gave it to his daughter to put together, thinking that it would take enough time to allow him to relax. Only in a scant minute, his daughter says, I'm done. And he said, how did you do it so fast? And she said, on the other side of the picture of the world was a picture of a person. And all I had to do was put the person together and the world took care of itself. I know I should sit down now while I'm ahead. I was speaking a little bit earlier today about the failure of the golden rule. Because the words are so good, like so many of the words of all of our magnificent traditions, and the shape of the world, the radical polarization in which we are living is evidence that words alone don't do it. So rather than looking at the golden rule as a rule, I suspect it's time to appreciate it as a golden reality. Because what the golden reality essentially says is that the one looking at you through my eyes and the one looking at me through your eyes is the same one. That we in fact are sharing a single presence, a single life, a single being. Yes, through the particular locations from which we are viewing, through the particular histories, the particular tribes, the particular beliefs. But at the moment we recognize that how I treat another is how I'm treating myself. At the moment I realize that bringing that supporting another and holding another in a compassionate embrace is holding us all in that embrace, then we live into a golden reality. A golden reality which can reflect in a world healed of the incredible fragmentation and separation that now exists. In my tradition, we utilize verses of Torah and verses of Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, as focuses for meditation, and one of my favorites is Shiviti Adonai Lenegdi Tamid. For those of you who are keeping score, it's in Psalm 46. Shiviti Adonai Lenegdi Tamid, I set the Eternal One before me always. I set the Eternal One before me always. It's like one of the mantras. So that everyone I see, everything I see, I understand. That one is holy. That one is just as worthy and just as precious and just as special as I. Jewish teachers through the ages have been asked, what's the most important teaching of Torah? What's the most important teaching of the Jewish tradition? And perhaps you know that some have answered, you shall love the Eternal One, your God. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Beautiful. But my favorite verse of the moment is from the book of Deuteronomy. Harei taladat, you have already been shown to know, ki Adonai hu ha'Elohim, that the absolute transcendent one awakens within each and every one of us as our God, as our expression of one being. Ein od milvado. There is nothing else. All of us here and all of us everywhere, seeking to awaken into the reality of our situation that we might bring healing. And we might sing a song of wholeness whose harmony can resonate throughout this planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Ted. And next we have Reverend Michael Ingersoll. For over 30 years, he's been involved with the Center for Spiritual Living and interfaith communities and organizations as a teacher, consultant, and minister. As an educator, facilitator, and dynamic producer, Michael's background includes leadership roles at the Seattle Center for Spiritual Living, New York Sacred Center, Genesis Global Spiritual Center, the New Seminary, and One Spirit Learning Alliance. Michael has been honored by many local and national organizations, including Lifetime Television's National Community in Service Award. That's no surprise. A former recreational aerialist and teacher of the flying trapeze, Michael is known as the Flying Minister. Reverend Michael.
Surely the presence of love is in this place. You can feel its mighty power and its grace. There's a holy hush around us. We see glory on each face. Surely the presence of love is in this place. I love starting talks with that. I love the notion that we honor that which is the presence right out of the gate. And that reminds me of a grandmother who was walking along the shore of the ocean with her grandson, and a big rogue wave comes in and knocks them down and drags her grandson out into the ocean. And she falls to her knees, and she implores God, I will never ask for another thing in my life. She looks up. I will never ask for anything again, but please bring him back. And another huge rogue wave tumbles onto the beach, and there he is. And she takes him in her arms with tears in her eyes and looks up and out and says, he was wearing a little hat. Let it ripple for a second. That looking out is what I'm here to talk about. Looking out is what New Thought is about. The Center for Spiritual Living is one of the largest and oldest New Thought churches in the Puget Sound and Pacific Northwest area. But there are many other New Thought churches across the country today. And what is that New Thought? Well, if we go back to our roots, to the 19th century, to the philosophy that caught Phineas Quimby, caught his attention. He was the first proponent of it, this mixture of metaphysics and religion and science, and he had a new thought. And that new thought was, I'm going to stop looking out, because perhaps God is within. God's not that long, white, bearded guy in the sky who's checking his list and checking it twice to see if we've been naughty or nice. This capricious, unpredictable force of life. No. God is that indwelling presence within each and everything. And he thought, if it could be in the flowers, and if it could be in the plants, and if it could be in everything that grows, it most certainly has to be within me. And I am going to look within to discover that mining for gold within is where the presence lives. That God self resides there. The force of life itself for every living soul, being, thing. And when we surrender to that presence in thoughtful, mindful, reflective ways, that presence then informs us on a number of levels. It's a combination of what we listen to and what we listen from. A connection that allows us to act then in ways more thoughtful and more deepened and more spiritually guided, bringing the energies of peace and love and integration and unity and connection to share with one another. It is our collective life. It is our collective breath. Never separate from us, nor us from it, because it is us living through and as each of us. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a follower of Quimby and New Thought, said, the highest revelation is that God is in every man. There's not only a unity of all souls, but also only one source, God. There is a religious power within each of us, a direct intuition of a spiritual God potent in the soul of every person. And we do not need to seek the source of authentic religious experience outside ourselves. We can discover salvation by the revelation of the God within.
Thank you, Reverend Michael. So, being of Jewish heritage myself, I think we have you outnumbered tonight. Our next guest is Phil Goldberg. Philip Goldberg has been studying India's spiritual traditions for nearly 50 years as a practitioner, teacher, and writer. He is co-host of the Spirit Matters podcast, leads tours to India, and has written numerous acclaimed books, including American Veda and his latest, The Life of Yogananda, the story of the yogi who became the first modern guru. Thank you, Phil. We'll be forever grateful for this book. Please speak to us.
About a week ago, I flew into Los Angeles, where I live, and I took a taxi, and the driver, who had a Middle Eastern accent, asked for my address and started driving, and I told him the address, and he'd never heard of my street. So there's a street that runs parallel to mine that's better known, it's bigger, and the street name is A-L-L-A. So I said, "Do you know Allah?" And he turned indignantly and said, "I am an atheist." And I thought, you really have to choose your words with care. And you have to know to whom you are speaking. I use that as an example of, I think, a very important component of our understanding of East meeting West. The great spiritual teachings of India, the Vedic tradition, the principles and practices that we think of as the yoga tradition, what some people would call Hinduism, have already had a major transformative effect on our culture. Obviously, we wouldn't be here. But way beyond that, on a very deep level, it's had a big impact on the religious and spiritual landscape of our country. I would point out to Reverend Michael that a lot of the early New Thought founders were influenced by these teachings, by the early translations of the Bhagavad Gita and other texts that were coming in. And Ernest Holmes, the founder of his tradition, was a great student of the Gita and actually knew Yogananda because they were both in Los Angeles at the same time. So in subtle ways and powerful ways, these teachings have had a big impact. And one of the reasons they had that impact was that the emissaries of these traditions who came to the West were very skilled at choosing the right words and knowing to whom they were speaking. Yogananda was a great exemplar of that. So was his great predecessor, Swami Vivekananda. So were the successors to Yogananda, the ones whose path was made easier because of his work, the ones who came in the 60s and 70s. They had in common what in Sanskrit is called upaya, skillful means. They were, in order to reach people, they had to understand this new culture with new values, new traditions, new ways of looking at the world, and adapt these universal, eternal teachings to the culture they found themselves in and the period of time they found themselves in. Yogananda was here in the 1890s. 30 years later, Yogananda came. The 20s and 30s were very different from the 1890s. The 60s and 70s were different from the 20s and 30s. This culture is very different from India. And if you look at Yogananda's work, as I have, and the others, you see skillful adaptation, this careful way of taking what is true and eternal and communicating it in new language with new delivery systems. They didn't teach yogic methods with correspondence course in India. That was a new technology in the 1920s. Yogananda took advantage of that. You could clip a coupon and mail it in and get teachings that were only transmitted from guru to student in his culture. This was an adaptation. They didn't have Sunday services that looked like church services to communicate yogic wisdom in India. He instituted that as well. But the important thing to keep in mind, and I'm saying this to beseech all of you who will be the ones who continue to bring these teachings of the East into various aspects of Western culture, to follow his example. Because in the process of adaptation, to truly assimilate these teachings and integrate them into the culture in ways that do not threaten the values and perspectives of the recipients, you need to adapt skillfully. And at the same time, maintain the integrity of the tradition that you're adapting. If you look at Yogananda's work, you see that being done with great skill. He adapted the language, he adapted the titles of his talks to what would reach Westerners. He adapted to the new technologies. He adapted to the customs. But he didn't compromise on the integrity of what these teachings were and what they represented. He kept to the truth. He kept to the dignity of the teachings and adapted them without distortion and without dilution. And I would call upon all of us to continue that process of being creative and innovative in the ways we adapt these teachings and bring them to the public, and at the same time be traditionalists and preserve the integrity of the teachings. And in that way, this meeting of East and West will continue to be progressive and, we hope, transform the consciousness of the country in an ongoing and continuous way, because God knows we need a transformation of consciousness from the inside out. Yes? Yeah. Thank you.
Our keynote speakers here this evening are Nayaswami's Jyotish and Devi Novak. They were there 50 years ago when Ananda was first founded in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, and now has become a worldwide work. They were friends, and they were trained by our founder, Swami Kriyananda, and now they spend their time, their years on 3 continents, 3 nations, Italy, India, America, serving the many, many friends and guiding the work of Ananda. And it is our pleasure, privilege, and joy to welcome Jyotish and Devi, and we'll start with Jyotish.
Thank you, friends. I want to talk a little bit about our part of this whole thing. We've heard really wonderful and inspiring messages from all of the speakers, and it is very, very important that we hear those inspiring words, because without some sort of inspiration, we won't take action. But I want to talk a little bit more about the actions that we need to take. The theme that we were asked to talk about is a new tomorrow today. Well, it's really very, very important that we have a new tomorrow, because for many people, today doesn't look so good. I don't know if you are among those people, but as we travel around, we hear very serious stories about depression and suicide and tension and hopelessness. So I thought maybe to start with a longer-term view of what a new tomorrow actually looks like, at least what it looks like from the tradition of cultures that have looked over long cycles. In our tradition, it's called the Yuga cycle, but in other traditions, it is called the ages of man, and various, but almost all of the ancient cultures had a sense of a very long rhythm to life. So in that sense, what does a new tomorrow look like? Because in the way that it's presented right now, I don't know if you felt this, but whenever I see a movie about the future or a book about the future, it's rarely a utopian book, and almost always a dystopian. There's always an alien invasion that ends with nuclear warfare and the elimination of mankind or something. It's not a pretty picture. Well, of course, part of that is that media is not going to sell many movie tickets by showing a beautiful utopia where everybody is happy and gets along beautifully and is kind and lives by the golden rule. You just don't fill up a blockbuster schedule with that kind of a message. So part of it is the problem of the media. But beyond the problem of the media, there is today a sense of hopelessness. There is today a sense that the future, the tomorrow that we're looking at, is looking worse and worse, not better and better. Well, let's look at that long cycle. And I have, as the old joke goes, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that there is a utopian future ahead of us. The bad news is it's a long ways away. In the Indian tradition of the yugas, there are 4 yugas: Kali Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, and Kali Yuga. Forget the Indian names. What it means is that in the lowest age, righteousness is hard to find. As they say, Dharma, or righteousness, in the lowest age, stands on only one leg. And when it stands on one leg, it is unstable and can't stand for very long. So we have fortunately passed out of that lowest age into the second age, and now righteousness is standing on 2 legs. But I don't know if you've ever seen a cow trying to balance itself on 2 legs, but it doesn't do so well. So the age that we find ourselves in is actually quite an unstable age. Devi had a very good quip one time, because Swami Kriyananda said that we're still early on in this transition. So Swami Kriyananda said that the old forms of the lowest age, which is complete separation of everything. Those old forms are being animated by the new energy of the age that we find ourselves in, because the keynote of our age now is energy. And Devi said, it sounds a little bit like dinosaurs on steroids. And that's a pretty good description of what we see right now as the conflicts in the world. Because the dinosaurs are not physical dinosaurs, they're the old patterns of thinking, the old patterns of wanting to keep things separate, wanting to keep things apart. But they're animated by all the energy that we find ourselves in. So it's going to be an unstable age for a while, but that leads to, so first there is just stuck consciousness, then there is consciousness with energy, but unfortunately the consciousness with energy in the age that we find ourselves in is looking for its own fulfillment and its own aggrandizement and enrichment, and not for others. The next stage is when we begin to really care about others. And finally, we begin to find a unified world. Unified because it truly is what each of our speakers have been talking about, the realization that there is one God that animates us all. So that's the cycle of world consciousness. But honestly, if we are foolish enough to let the evolution of the world dictate what age we live in, then we probably deserve what we get. We ourselves can make a choice about what kind of age of consciousness we live in. So, do we want to remain living in an age of self-centeredness and greed and the elements of conflict and separation that follow from people being self-interested? I myself don't. I doubt that anyone here does. But what is our part in this? Is our part in this to change the world, to change those cycles of the yugas, to change the cycles? It's a 24,000-year cycle that we're talking about. Is it our part to try to force the change on others? Absolutely not, because if we wait for that, that's God's will. There was a beautiful incident at the time of the separation of Pakistan, when India got its independence. At that time, India and Pakistan were separated. The Hindu states, the Hindu areas from the Muslim areas. Up until that time, they'd gotten along just fine. But basically, it was the instigation of the separative consciousness of the British that was forcing that change. At any rate, at that time, someone came to a great, great saint, Ananda, who I had the blessing to meet and be with for a while. She was one of the highest saints of modern India. And at that time they said, Mother, isn't there something that you can do about this? Something that will be a change and something you can do to prevent this separation. And she withdrew for several hours. And then she came to the people who had asked, and she said, don't you think he who created this world knows how to run it? And that's all she would say. So that sounds like a kind of an enigmatic answer, and maybe not even a very satisfying answer. But a friend of ours recently, an Indian friend, we were talking, and she said something very interesting. She said, at this point in history with so much tension going on, if India had remained one nation instead of it being split, if India had been one nation, we would now be experiencing civil war. And so in these long cycles, those things that don't seem very easy to understand have a reason behind them. But as I say, our part is not to live in the age in which we find ourselves, in the consciousness with which we find ourselves. Because we can choose to move ahead and have a new tomorrow today, at least in our consciousness. So what is the next future age? What do we have to move ahead to? We have to move ahead from thinking of ourselves and disregarding the needs of others. It's an ancient teaching. As we heard, why doesn't the golden rule work? The golden rule is absolutely the truth. Why doesn't it work? Because the consciousness of people is not ready yet to apply that simple spiritual teaching. But are you ready? Forget the rest of them. We won't get anywhere by expending our energy in changing others, in forcing others to think differently. That's an avoidance issue, because if we spend our time trying to get others to change so that we don't have to, we're part of the problem. So the question is not, are they ready to live by the golden rule? Is the world ready to make that transition? The real question is, am I ready to live by the golden rule? Are you ready to live by the golden rule? And not just ready, but are you taking actual steps in order to do that? And what are those steps? First of all, Ananda comes from the yogic tradition. And so the first step in it is to calm ourselves sufficiently, both mentally and emotionally, to calm ourselves sufficiently so that we can begin to see the reality of our own being. Some years ago, some friends and two friends and Devi and I were boating on Lake Washington here, and I had a pair of sunglasses that fell out and sunk down in 8 or 9 feet of water. And I didn't want to lose them. They were Ray-Bans. And at that time, that was kind of the height of my possessions, So I dove down 2 or 3 times, and I felt around because the water was a little murky, and felt around trying to find where they were, and I couldn't find them. And I was worried, and then I saw that they had a little kind of a tub, plastic tub with fruit salad in it. And so I took that out, put it in a little bag, and I took that plastic tub, and I set it on top of the water. And as soon as I did that, because the bottom of the tub was flat, it flattened the waves that were there on the lake, and I could look down and see exactly where the sunglasses were. Dove down, and I'm not sure I still have those sunglasses, but at least I still have the story. So that's the first step that we have to do, is we have to stop the waves of the mind and the heart sufficiently. So the yogic practices, the practices, as we saw, of Hatha Yoga, of pranayama, of meditation, all of the various ways that are given to us, which, as Phil talked about in American Veda, his previous book, talks about the movement of these teachings from the East to the West in order to mix the East and to bring together the best of both of these elements of our planet. And so you and I need to, you don't have to follow our path, But you do have to follow some kind of a path that works for you, because you won't spontaneously change. The elements that are trying to roil the waters of the planet that we live on are very powerful and very, very self-interested. And so unless you find a way to put a little plastic tub down in your life, you're going to be subject to the waves, and you aren't going to be able to see your way forward very much. And so our first thing that we have to do is we have to adapt some kind of a spiritual practice that works for us, that allows us to calm our minds and calm our hearts and see within us the image of God. And when we can see that image of God residing within us, that's when we can begin to realize that that same image does indeed reside in everyone else. Otherwise, without the experience, the words are beautiful, the words are inspiring, but there's no change in the world or in our world. So we have to adapt a practice of meditation and prayer. And the second thing that we have to do is we have to adapt some daily practice of changing our attitudes and putting our realizations into practice. So if, the teaching of the golden rule is thou shalt treat others the way that you would expect them to treat you. I once saw somebody gave us a couple of years ago a little bookmark with that same statement given in about a dozen different traditions, including those that we've heard from tonight, in Islam and in Judaism and in Christianity and in Hinduism and Taoism and all the isms all talk about that same thing. So the words are out there, the concept is out there, but we have to begin to apply that in our daily life. And it takes a change of habit and a change of attitude in order to do that we have to actually work on. So we need to try to find some daily practice by which we actually do treat others the way that we want them to be treating us. We have the great blessing of living with Swami Kriyananda, who carried around him a kind of a bubble of joy and light, but in this case of friendship and kindness. So he would walk down the street, and if he saw somebody who looked collapsed on themselves, he would stop and he would just say something to lift them. Anything. What a beautiful scarf that is. I love that color red. It's so vibrant. I want to thank you for brightening my day by wearing that scarf. And you could see somebody who maybe hadn't had any person tell them a kind word for a long time. You could see them change by that single little act. So we have to find 100 little acts of kindness. As Yogananda said, I'm going to shoot people with the buckshot of my smiles. So we have to find a way to put into actual practice these beautiful words that we're hearing. If we change ourselves through meditation, through prayer, through deep contemplation, and then we activate that in the world that we're actually inhabiting. Not Washington, not the NATO, not all the things where, yes, we want that all to change, but unless we change ourselves and help to provide the environment that allows those who are actually in our lives to change, the words will remain just words. But it's up to you and me to bring the tomorrow of a utopia into today. And it must start with our life, and it must start with this very day, or at least tomorrow. Let the new tomorrow start tomorrow.
What is left to be said? I think first I want to thank all of the speakers. This is the second year we've been a part of the panel with you, and you fill me with inspiration, each one of you. This side too. I think I'm going to make my talk a little more personal. When I heard the name of our program, East Meets West Fest, which is very clever, it brought to mind a story of how I got on the spiritual path. I was finishing up my last year of college. This was 1969, Madison, Wisconsin. And I often had part-time jobs to earn a little extra money while I was in college. This particular job, in the last semester of my senior year, was in the research facilities of a hospital. So it was in a basement. And it was, my job was to go into a chemistry lab after all the research had been done that day. Nobody else was around. And I had to get into a sterile outfit. And I had to I had to wash the test tubes. That was my job. But they had to be perfectly sterile. And there was no one else around. It was in the basement. It was dark. There were these toxic chemicals. Part of the way you wash the test tubes is you take them to a big acid vat under a hood that sucked out the fumes. And you would slowly lower this rack of test tubes into the acid. And I must say, I still have a few little scars on my forehead from not doing it perfectly. But it was so sterile and so toxic and so dead. And the only thing that made it worse was that if I had to go to the bathroom, you had to go out in the hall, and right across from this lab was the morgue. And very often I'd be going out to go to the bathroom, and somebody would be wheeling a corpse down the hall, and there I was. And it was as though my life was coming to an end. And it's true, that part of my life was coming to an end. But do you know what saved me? Just at this time, 1969, this wonderful CD cassette came out. And it was called, and that's why the name of this fest reminded me, it was called West Meets East. Ravi Shankar and Yehudi Menuhin playing improvisations on the, I get chills even when I say it, playing improvisations on the violin and the sitar. And I would be in that sterile, dead lab. I worked from like 5 to 7, all by myself, with dead bodies right across the hall. And I would put that cassette on a little tape on a little tape player, and it was so filled with life and joy and power and everything that the life around me did not have. And I just said, where do I find this? It's not in the world around me. It was as though some divine guide was saying, a life without this spirit is filled with toxic chemicals and is dead. You will never find what you're looking for here, but it's in the life of the spirit. And a month later, someone gave me Autobiography of a Yogi and told me about Ananda. And about a month after that, I traveled, finished college, didn't look back, didn't even stay for graduation. I was done. That was the end of that chapter. And I got a ride, and I arrived at Ananda, and I began my journey. But we each have a journey. And I was thinking, what are the points of a successful spiritual journey? Well, I know for me, the very first step was I really didn't want to be where I was anymore. I wanted something to move. I wanted something to change. And so when we begin our spiritual journey, there has to be that intense motivation. This life is not going to work for me. Maybe it works for everybody else, but it's not going to work for me. I remember, probably 20 years after I was on the spiritual path, my mother, who was a very nice little Jewish lady, and actually quite a remarkable woman, she came to visit me and she said, you know, I only have one sibling, but I have 23 cousins. And she said, of all the cousins, you're the only one who didn't follow the traditional route. But my mother said that you're the only one that's happy. And I was so glad she could see that. But so a spiritual journey has to start with a desperate need to move from where you are right now somewhere else. And you don't always know where that somewhere else is. In fact, you rarely do. That's why you need a map. You need teachings. You need a teacher. I'm just so amazed because we travel the world and we've been doing it before the advent of GPS. And I thought, how did we do this before GPS? We never got lost very much. But anyway, you need to be on your journey. You need a tradition. You need a map, whatever it is. But we can't get there by ourselves because we don't know where we're going. And so you have to be on a journey, you need a map. And then you have to be willing to step outside of who you think you are and how you've always defined yourself. And to say, maybe I'm somebody else that I don't know yet. And you have to be willing to allow that transformation to happen. And then finally, you have to have the humility to know that all of our effort and all of the striving and all of the study takes you right back to where you started from. And it was just always the God that was in you. And you looked here and there, and every single tradition says that. Christ said, lo, you look here and there, but the kingdom of God is within you. And the Hindu sages say, Tat Tvamasi, thou art that. And the incredible, powerful, vibrant, vivid poems of Rumi, they say the same thing. It's all inside you, and you look everywhere else. And the eternally beautiful Psalms of David, they all sing that same song. It's inside us. But we have to go on a journey to find it. Because if we stay where we are, we become absorbed with what seems real and what seems familiar. So, we are at a changing time. A new tomorrow today. What does that mean? It means that the present isn't what we think it is. Who we are isn't who we think we are. We are eternal. Time doesn't exist the way we think it does. The journey we go on ends up right where we began. And in the beautiful poem Samadhi, we played a clip of it, of Ananda reading it during the Yoga Postures demonstration. Master says, present, past, future, no more for me, but ever present, all flowing I, everywhere. That kingdom of God that is within us is eternal, is timeless, and it is what we are seeking in everything we do. Every drink that the alcoholic takes, every possession that the rich man buys, every act of greed where we take something from someone else because we think we'll be happier with it rather than them having it. Every one of those actions is simply to find the joy of our own being, but we don't know where to look for it. And so let's begin that journey. And Master said, East meets West, he said that in the future, the cultures of particularly India and America would come together to lead the world. And what does that mean? Because America, there's so much that this culture has. Don't sell ourselves short. We have the ability, when you look at the history of America, it was founded with a vision. And maybe that vision is lost now. But that vision is still in the DNA of what this country is. And that's the art of the possible. I can be a poor immigrant from Mexico or from Ukraine or wherever it might be. But I can educate my children. I can find a home. I can find security here. I can invent something that no one else ever thought of. A friend of ours from Italy came here, and the thing I said, what strikes you about America? She said, the windows. The windows are so big here. In Europe, the windows are little. And what does that mean? The big perspective. We can see. But what India brings is we see where we're going. There's that joke that the first mate comes up to the captain of a ship and says, we have very good news. The good news and bad news. The good news is we're making very good time, but the bad news is we're lost. And I think that sort of encapsulates the West right now. We're very efficient, but we don't really know where we're going. And that's why coming together, the efficiency of our culture with the knowledge of what life is about, that the ancient sages of the East have brought us. This is the new tomorrow. And moment by moment, we are moving towards it. We are moving towards it. And will it happen today? Will it happen tomorrow? Yes and no. It happens as moment by moment, each person turns towards the light. We saw once we were in the wonderful city of Florence in Italy, and there's the beautiful Uffizi Museum, which is the greatest collection of Renaissance art in the world. And there's a very simple sepia sketch called The Madonna. It's done by Leonardo. And in this sketch, it's beautiful. We had a very wonderful guide who explained it to us. She said, the Madonna is in the center, and she's the source of all light, the Divine Mother. And all the characters around her, it's a study in how souls relate to the light. There's some young man on bended knee in total adoration and openness to the Madonna. Then there's a thoughtful intellectual standing back, kind of maybe. And then there's a bitter old man with his back turned along the side, and the light diminishes as it moves away from the source. And what is that source? Well, the divine in you and me. And so every moment where we say, yes, I want to identify with the light within me and the light within all of us. There's Swami's beautiful song, for the light that is in you and the light that is in me will ever be expanding. Will be expanding to our love, which is forever new. And so, tomorrow, today, present, past, future, it's all one. But the awakening of the human soul, that's what's happening. That's the only game in town. And that's for everybody. Doesn't matter on age. We saw these beautiful, agile people doing yoga postures. maybe we can't do that anymore, but we can still find God. And we can find that light within us. But we have to start the journey to within ourselves and the journey to the eternal now. God bless you all.
Our guest would like to share with us some simple meditations and guided imagery together, so I'd like the speakers to come forward into our final segment of the evening.
So we'll kind of have a little change of pace now. And I'd like we're going to have each of our speakers lead a prayer or an affirmation or a chant from their tradition, embracing all the great religions, or most of the great religions of the world. And so let's start by just having a moment or two of silence where we get centered in our heart and open, and to be united in our desire to be immersed in these great traditions.
Keep your consciousness inward. I'm going to lead us in a prayer for peace and harmony in the world from the tradition of Paramahansa Yogananda. It's partly an affirmation and partly a prayer. And so I'm going to repeat, Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. And I want all of us to say that together 10 times. And then when we're finished with that, I will say, Lord, fill me with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. And we'll say that together 3 times, recognizing that the peace and harmony is a universal element sought by everyone. So together, let's repeat. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill this world with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. And now, Lord, fill me with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill me with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Lord, fill me with peace and harmony, peace and harmony. Let's sit silently for just a moment, sending out, radiating from your heart the vibration of peace and harmony so that it touches every nation, every person, every living being on the planet.
passages from the Upanishads. Upanishad is derived from Sanskrit that means to sit near. So imagine you are sitting near a great master who is teaching you these precious teachings from the Upanishad. Maybe it's Yogananda, maybe it's another master of your choosing. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman flows all that is. From Brahman all, yet Brahman remains the same. Brahman is one without a second. This self is Brahman. I am Brahman. Thou art that. All of this is indeed Brahman. This invisible and subtle essence is the spirit of the whole universe. That is reality. That is truth. And you are that. Like two golden birds perched on the same tree, intimate friends, the ego and the self dwell in the same body. The former eats of the sweet and sour fruit of the tree of life, while the latter observes in stillness. As long as we think we are the ego, we fall into sorrow. But realize that you are the self, the Lord of life, and you will be free of sorrow. And continue to reflect on the presence by whatever name you call it, by whatever path you celebrate it. But that internal loving presence that's uniquely yours, the authentic song of your soul. And listen to this prayer in hymn that celebrates the present. Into the presence would I enter now, for I am surrounded by the love of God. Let every voice help me remember what my purpose is. Let every voice but God's be still in me. Let me remember what my purpose is. Let all the world be blessed with peace through me. Let me remember I am one with God. Peace to all persons who are one with me.
And now, my friends, please bring your attention to rest on your physical heart. Our heart has been yearning, thirsting, aching to connect with us. If it pleases you, one hand or both hands, touch your heart, feel your heart. And with the heart, listen to this beautiful revelation that came to the Prophet Muhammad in a dream, where divinity says to each one of us, "Beloved one, I cannot be contained in the space of the earth. I cannot be contained in the space of the heavens, but I can be contained in the space of the pure, loving heart." Just be with that mystery, the divine heart. God is outside of you and inside of you, in your heart. For a few seconds, can you feel a connection with the beat, the rhythm of the heart? God is the heartbeat within the heartbeat. And now, the Quranic recitation, as you focus on the heart, please chant a sacred sound, H-U, Hu, from Sufi tradition. Hu. Keep on going.
Ancient psalmist said, Harpu ud'u ki anochi Elohim. Be still and know that I am is God. Be still and know that I am is God. Begin with me one word at a time, each time adding a word until the verse is complete, and then repeating and taking away one word, so that we begin. Be. Be still. Be still. Be still and. Be still and. Be still and know. Be still and know. Be still and know that. Be still and know that I am is.
Be still and know that I am is.
Be still and know that I am.
Be still and know that I am.
Be still and know that I.
Be still and know that I.
Be still and know that.
Be still and know that.
Be still and know.
Be still and know.
Be still and.
Be still and.
Be still.
Be still.
And now together, be.
Be.
Be still.
Be still.
You don't need me to lead it. Together, be still and know. Be still and know. Be still and know that. Be still and know that I. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I am is. Be still and know that I am is God. Be still and know that I am is. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I. Be still and know that. Be still and know. Be still and. Be still. Be. And allow the words to unfold in the silence.
Let's conclude now with a visualization. Feel the stillness and the peace awakened within your own heart. Visualize this peace and light as a sphere of joy, expanding from your heart, enveloping your whole being. Visualize your sphere of light like a luminous bubble of joy, merging with all those bubbles of light, filling this chapel, becoming a great sphere of light, filled with various colors, various shimmering blades of light. But visualize now the sphere of light expanding throughout the Seattle area, throughout Washington, throughout the west coast of this continent, North America, South America. The sphere of light has no limits, but goes ever onward, expanding to envelop all continents, all oceans, all life. In a sphere of light, and still onward the sphere of light expands, enveloping our planet, our solar system, our galaxy, in a sphere of light and peace and love. And still the sphere expands, to touch the farthest reaches of infinity. Now, feel yourself once more, floating in this infinite sphere of light. A boundless ocean of love. And as Yogananda prayed, when he brought his mission to the West, Divine Mother, may thy love shine forever. May thy love shine forever on the sanctuary of my devotion. On the sanctuary of my devotion. And may I be able to awaken thy love. To awaken thy love in all hearts. In all hearts.
All the speakers in the choir will lead a procession out after the song.
The words to the song are printed on your program. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. And it simply goes like this. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say.